Today, we're going to talk about one of the greatest science fiction franchises of all time, Terminator. Terminator 1, great horror science fiction film. Terminator 2 completely flips the script, changes it, changes the genre, elevates it to science fiction action. Probably one of the greatest sequels of all time. um, it's right there with debates with The Empire Strikes Back, Godfather 2, and The Dark Knight. I remember being a kid and getting Terminator 2 toys for my birthday at like 7 years old. Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines. Interesting story. The idea that machines are rising, that we didn't stop Judgment Day, we prolonged Judgment Day. Okay. But definitely feels a lot in line with like Jurassic Park 3, where it feels like a bunch of leftover ideas, action pieces, and set pieces just kind of thrown together. And as much as I've watched that movie, I still don't always remember it. Salvation, my problem with this is it was interesting. They had a great twist ending that they backed out of, which could have been just a beautiful twist of a story. Um, but the problem with that film is I feel that when we get to actually living in the world of the future, you want dystopian, you see the war between humans and the machines. You start to draw parallels to other like stories. But then you start getting these machines, these big Terminators that look more like Transformers. And I think it takes away from the tactile nature and the really eeriness that was first shown. And sometimes less is more. Having us not see the future and not see, a whole film of that other than just a scene works much more effective than watching an entire film set in that time. Um, and, it's kind of like the rise of John Connor, and it works well enough, I guess, but yeah, it loses a lot. Um, and then we get Terminator Genesis, which is the first real reboot requel where we have Kyle Reese going back in time, but something's happened when he goes back for some reason, and all that gets like tossed aside because because studio interference. Matt Smith was supposed to be Skynet, like in human form or like undercover as a person, but they cut all of his scenes except like one cameo. So Skynet was supposed to interfere, and Kyle Reese goes back, but it's a different time to a different Sarah Connor, and there's already a Terminator there. Pardon me, cease. And now Skynet is being called Genesis, which is just another example of we're inevitable. And I think it fell apart because the studio wanted to make a whole new trilogy kind of thing, but they couldn't pull it off. And then the John Connor is now a different kind of Terminator. Spoiler, because John Connor comes back in time. It just fell apart. Okay, but it has its fun moments. And once again, I've seen it, don't always remember it. Then we get Terminator Dark Fate, which James Cameron called his official idea sequel to Judgment Day. And in the opening scene, John Connor gets killed by a Terminator that was already there. And it makes you question what the rules of time travel are. I really liked Rian Johnson's Looper up until the very end because, spoiler for Looper, when Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character shot himself, it should have reset the loop the entire film and went back to the beginning, as if none of this ever happened. Because that's kind of how a loop, and they show reasoning for that to be in the film. So with that, the ground rules that there was already another Terminator somehow sent in time to stop John Connor from succeeding. Where has this Terminator been this whole time? And so randomly, when the John Connor melts the chip and they stop Judgment Day, wouldn't time travel enact that that Terminator was never sent, or they stopped that Terminator? Would that Terminator not be able to active? Like, there's a lot of questions about the principle of the time travel, how there was another Terminator that was able to exist and kill John Connor. And it just kind of feels like a cheat. Because if that's the case, because this Terminator was sent to look like Arnold, having John Connor just made a bond with the Arnold looking Terminator, so it was easier for him to kill John. Well, if that's the case, why don't they just send like a crap ton of Terminators in the back? Why just one? That because that was always part of the problem. The stakes is the energy and everything it takes. Time travel is not something that's simple. It takes a lot, and that's why Skynet was able to pull it off. But then the human resistance could only send one person, and it was risky because they weren't even sure if it was going to fully work or not. Um, it raises the stakes if we're not sure if we can actually pull this off. And then the last part of it is it basically establishes that we're always fated to be here. And it tries to say that this woman that she's to protect is not that she's going to have the savior, she is the savior. Awesome. It's fine. It's humanity should come together. But it still just feels like to really be a great chapter in this dark fate that inevitability is the fate. And it's like, it makes me feel more like it's trying to rip off the Matrix when the Matrix ripped off things from Terminator. So that's the quick history. Now let's get into my pitches. I mean, that can be good, that can be bad. It just depends. All right. So there was also the Terminator TV series, the Sarah Connor Chronicles, which I watched most of, but not all of. And every time they do the Terminator, they try to change the machine, make it scarier, make it more whatever. All right. So the movie, has the time travel aspect. That's part of what makes it fascinating. But this is my pitch. This might take a moment to wrap your brain around. And it all looks at how you look at time travel. Okay? In the original film, we're just going to go back to the original film. John Connor, in the future, sends Kyle Reese in the past to protect his mom. Now, let's assume that this is the first time this has happened. Okay? He goes back to save Sarah Connor. Now, that night, Sarah was supposed to have a date. Okay? Hold that in your brain. Kyle comes back, saves Sarah Connor, tells her this whole story about the future and that she's going to have the son, John Connor. He's going to rise up. He's going to be the leader of the resistance and everything, and we have to protect John Connor. Then, of course, Kyle Reese gets her pregnant, and she names her son John, and then raises him in this paramilitary environment. Okay? What if that's the first time that fate is altered? What if, on that night when she had that date, she was going to fall in love, marry this man, have a son, name him John, and this man that she was going on a date with, maybe he was already in the military, so John would follow in his father's footsteps. He would join the military and then would become the leader of the resistance, but a stronger, better leader. But by Kyle going back in time and impregnating Sarah and telling her about a John, he creates a different John Connor. So now he creates this time loop where he created John Connor, and thus he changes the future. So the John Connor that then leads the resistance was never the original John Connor. He's one that was created to fight in a war. So it'd be kind of like Back to the Future 2 style in the sense that the idea is we have to stop Kyle Reese now. So you send someone back who's there to protect Sarah Connor, but stop Kyle Reese from impregnating Sarah Connor. So you're getting into overlapping time. Now, granted, it's confusing, but we live in a society that we now have multiverse films, and we have films that are just ridiculous with time travel. Now, the biggest problem and hurdle with this pitch, right, even though it's awesome, is I feel like this almost would be a video game storyline. Okay? Because the actors are all too old. And this is, like I said, this is like getting into Back to the Future 2 style where you need your actors because you're overlapping, you're going back to the original. And as much as I think that Terminator um, franchise has validity, is it interesting? The problem is, and this is the same thing with some certain, when you do the less is more, like in the original Terminator and even Terminator 2, where you have one or two robots in the past fighting, it feels more powerful. When you jump to the future, like in Salvation, it starts to feel, because you're starting to see a lot more robots, which are cool. So you get to the big ones that feel more like Transformers. You lose some of the tactileness of the field, but you can still do it. Let's look at recently Freddy Alvarez, um, Alien Romulus, right? He made that very much a film that fits with Alien and Aliens, very much so. Okay, and right there, that's another franchise where James Cameron comes in, second film, flips the script. Okay, so like I was saying, Terminator. I think the other thing you could do would be like Terminator: The First Battle or something. It would be you would open almost with just a kind of, excuse me, getting over this sickness, cold opening where we see the missiles launching and people doing their day-to-day stuff and just the annihilation. And Skynet has sent um, all of these missiles, and then we see, you know, um, the factory that's where we see, and then we see the first marching of the machines coming into the streets and just obliterating people. And then we cut back and we would see, we get like a few days before, and we would see Skynet when it becomes aware of itself and it starts building more of these Terminators on mass scales where the military had only had a couple of built for recon for testing, but Skynet kicks it into high gear and builds it. And we really see the start of the war before um, before it gets to the point where, you know, it's like I said, like Transformer robots, like Terminator Salvation. You know, the idea is the weapons. You know, the first Terminator, they had more energy-based weapons too. We start to see more advanced weapons for the Terminator, and um, it really is the story of loss and human error and human arrogance. And I think even more relevant today with our rise of AI and how so many companies are like, oh, can AI do this, or can we get AI to do this? And I've talked about, like, this is part of an exercise that I do because I love writing and creating, and I've wanted to work with screenwriting. The problem that we're having is we're starting to see where they won't have AI write stories, and and I think that's relevant to this plot is where's the line of like, look, I always think back to our great pal Dr. Ian Malcolm with just because you can, whether or not you should. Like, where's the line where we realize, look, we could do this, but what is the real ramifications of this? And I think that's where the Terminator story logically could go. Though my time happening machinations is awesome, that could be a really cool Terminator video game. But let me know what you think.